Okay. Well, good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name's Stephen Howes, and I'm the Director of the Development Policy Centre here at the Crawford School at the Australian National University. I'd like to welcome you all to today's Development Policy Forum on behalf of the ANU and also on behalf of the four bodies behind today's event. Ourselves, DevPol, ACFID, Australian Council for International Development, IDCC, International Development Contractors Community, and of course the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Just before we begin today, I do want to acknowledge the suffering of the Moroccan people. I understand the estimated death toll from the horrific earthquake is now 2,500. I know I speak on behalf of all of us when I say that we stand in solidarity with the people of Morocco at this time. Well, I'm your MC for today, but I'm going to try and stand between you and the various speakers and panellists as little as possible by doing some forward planning or introducing. So for this session in particular, in a minute, I'm going to introduce Dr. Caroline Hughes to deliver the Welcome to Country, and I'm then going to hand over to Michelle Higuelen to introduce the Minister. So I'll say in advance that Michelle's the ED of ActionAid Australia and the Vice President of ACFID. After the Minister's speech, Jackie DeLacy will be chairing the Q&A, and Jackie is Chief Global Development Officer with APT Associates. It'll then be back to me to introduce Rod Hilton, who'll give us an overview of the policy, and then on to our first panel discussion. So you can see it's an action-packed day. Oh, sorry. It's my first mistake for the day.
They're all called Rod, so
That's right. Rod Brazier. Sorry, Rod. It's an action-packed day. It's something we're very happy to be associated with. We started DevPol in late 2010. In fact, one of the first things we did was organise with DFAT a forum to discuss the then new development policy under preparation. So it's good more than a decade later to be back at it again. I do want to say you're at a university where our organising principle is academic freedom. So I encourage you all to take advantage of that and say what you think. It is a public event. We believe in public discussion. And you are being live streamed and potentially recorded, so bear that in mind. There are also lots of people here, and I'm sure there'll be more people joining this morning. Lots of people who want a chance to speak, so keep your interventions brief as well as respectful. But at the same time, I do want to underline the purpose of today's event is to have a robust discussion and debate of the new policy, so please do join in. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Caroline Hughes, or Auntie Caroline, as she's widely known, to the podium. Dr. Hughes is a proud Ngunnawal woman and the Executive Director, Collection Services Group at the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, just nearby. She's had a distinguished career in the field of education over the last 30 years. Thank you very much, Auntie Caroline, for giving up your time today to be with us and to deliver the Welcome to Country. And could I ask you all to welcome Auntie Caroline?
Yuma, everyone. What a quiet audience you are. Yuma, it's a Ngunnawal word for hello, so Yuma, everyone. Yuma. Oh, that's beautiful. I think you might be the best audience that I've had. I'm really honoured to be here today to provide the Ngunnawal Welcome to Country. In the words of my ancestors, Yuma Yadong Gadba, Danga Baranju, Danga Galanga Garalinya, Baranjima, Maranjima, Naraganawali Galamban, Darawari, Ngunnawalbari. I'm one of many Ngunnawal elders and many Bell and Brown families of the Ngunnawal Nation. Coming from a family of 8, my mother a family of 14. We're a huge family and really proud of that. Minister Pat Conroy, International Development and Pacific Relations. Professor Stephen Howes, Director ANU, Development Policy Centre, representatives of the aid sector. And to you, our audience, both here physically on country, but also online. For me as a Ngunnawal elder, but also all Ngunnawal people, being on country, no building, concrete on the ground, or bitumen on the road will ever stop the beautiful vibration that we feel being on country. It is a calling that we hold deeply in our hearts and we hope to share with everybody being on country. It's not about you being other to us, but when we look at aid, understanding that you are also part of us, regardless of where you come from. And that's important for all of us as Australians to recognise and share. So in the spirit of wellbeing and coming together, I do welcome you all to Ngunnawal country, and I'd like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be with us either here in the room or online. For those of you that may not realise, Ngunnawal country is a large area of land mass. The ACT is actually an island on Ngunnawal country, which is a bit odd to think of, isn't it? But it is an island on Ngunnawal country, and our borders go to Braidwood towards the coast. We share Goulburn with the Gundungurra people. Wiradjuri are our neighbours with Cowra, and we go to Jugiong and Coolac and Micolago here in the ACT and into New South Wales. So I also recognise our neighbours, the Wiradjuri, the Yuin, Ngarigo and the Gundungurra people. I'd like to share with you a couple of beautiful words that I hope that you take away today. And one is Gulumban, and it means me, you, we together. And I think that's something important for the work that you're doing today. Not just today, but you have done and going into the future. And it means there is no I, not just about me, it's about everyone together and pulling each other along on that journey. And hopefully it's not a hard pull, it's a hand reaching out. There is another word, and that's Yinjamara. Yinjamara is a beautiful sacred word of the Wiradjuri and the Ngunnawal people. And you would have maybe have heard Stan Grant, the journalist, talking about Yinjamara with Q&A. And it is a concept, an ethos that we hope that all will learn by, but share with each other. And that's respect, caring for others, and always with kindness. It's listening to understand, seek to understand, not just to respond. And as I said, it's not just about the other. It's about how we enact that ourselves, not expecting others to do that for us. What are we giving out is what we should be expecting to get back. We know that the First Nations people of Australia are the oldest diplomats in the world. We know of the Mackesons and the trade that occurred. So in understanding that, I hope that in sharing that with you, you also understand about the concept of reciprocity. So reciprocity is a concept that has been part of our Aboriginal First Nations communities since time began, and it's where we cared for our neighbours. It didn't matter what they could give us today. What was important, and still is what I have today may be able to help somebody else. And I think that's a really important concept of what you are doing, and I applaud you for that. So in the words of my ancestors, I do want to close in saying Yumalundi, Nalawari, Darawari, Galamban, Budanjima, Maranjima, Balanjima, Yangu, Nalawiri, Dunimanyan, Galamban, Yarabinyan, Naraganawali, Injala, Marabiji, Malangari, Injala, Yinjamara, Yumalundi, Nalawari, Darawari. And what I've said to you in our beautiful languages, which I'm being really proud to lead the revitalisation of in the last 5 years, is hello, this place is Ngunnawal country. Together with you in the spirit of true reconciliation, we are keeping the pathways of our ancestors alive. Just doing something simple as a welcome to country or an acknowledgement to country. As fellow Australians or people visiting our country, you help keep those pathways alive, and that's really powerful and strong. And I also, a message to you from United Ngunnawal Elders Council, thank you for what you do for our friends in the Pacific, because we are in a position that we can help. And it's not about just keeping resources to ourselves, and it's the simple things that can change the lives, even of one individual, which is so important in moving forward. Thank you for listening to me this morning, and I'm really grateful to be here. Janyimaba, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hughes, Auntie Carolyn, for those beautiful words and such a warm welcome to country. Good morning, everyone. I would also like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land and affirm the support of both ACFID and ActionAid for a First Nations voice to Parliament. On behalf of ACFID, as well as the ANU Development Policy Centre, the IDCC and DFAT, I have the privilege of introducing our keynote speaker, the Minister for International Development and the Pacific, the Honourable Pat Conroy. Minister Conroy is the serving member for Shortland, having first been elected to Parliament in 2013. He has significant experience in aid and development, having served as Labor's Shadow Minister for International Development in the Pacific for 3 years, before his appointment in 2022 as Minister for International Development in the Pacific in the Albanese government, as well as Minister for Defence Industry. I'd like to start by appreciating the Minister's strong commitment to the sector. Since he arrived in office, we have seen an increase in the aid budget, the launch of a new development policy, as well as the Development Finance Review. Minister, it's a great privilege to have you here to deliver the keynote address for today's forum, which will be followed, as Stephen mentioned, by a Q&A with Jackie DeLacy from Apt Associates. Today's forum aims to generate discussion on Australia's new development policy and what lies ahead. The policy sets the stage for Australia's development cooperation for the years to come, presenting a vision for a peaceful, stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific region, which requires, of course, a focus on sustainable development and lifting people out of poverty. It's positive to see new climate targets, a humanitarian strategy, the Civil Society Partnership Fund, as well as reassertion of Australia's commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals. However, a strategy is only as useful as the resources committed to it. And by this I mean resourcing in every single sense of the word: financing, strategy, capability and leadership. Minister, you've spoken persuasively of the many ways to make the case for aid: the security case, the economic one, international relations, and of course the moral argument. And I quote, "Tackling poverty must be an urgent imperative for all people of conscience, especially for a generous nation committed to the fair go." Regrettably, however, Australia currently sits at 27 out of 30 OECD DAC donors on aid generosity. As a proportion of the overall federal budget, we have unfortunately never been less generous. The aid budget is almost half of what it was when Labor was last in office. This stands at odds with the generous character of our nation and the ambition of the new development policy. However, I want to say it is promising to see your party, the Labor Party, making a commitment at the recent national conference to reaffirm the need for a plan to get to 0.5% of GNI. Minister, we look forward to hearing your vision for this policy and the future of Australia's development program. This sector is committed to supporting your efforts, especially to scale our collective impact by supporting locally led development, driving increased investment in the SDGs, taking greater action on climate change, and tackling gender inequality and unequal power systems that hold people back from realising their rights. With that, I'd like to invite everyone to join me in welcoming the Minister for International Development in the Pacific, the Honourable Pat Conroy, to deliver the keynote address. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for your very kind introduction, and Auntie Caroline for that wonderful welcome to country. I too wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional owners of the land on which we gather and recognise any other people or families with connections to the lands of the ACT region. I acknowledge and welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending today's event. And I would like to take this opportunity to reaffirm the Albanese government's commitment to implementing the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. I'll speak a little more about our new policy in a moment, but I want to quickly ask you to think about the principles we have embedded in that policy of respectful listening, acting on partner priorities, and working in genuine partnership with governments and communities across our region. I see some incredibly strong parallels between what we are seeking to do through the referendum and what we are seeking to do with partners across the region. I think it's a fair assumption to make that all of you have a deep-seated interest in international development policy because you're driven by principles of justice, equity, and decency. And so in this spirit, I encourage you to reach out across your networks of friends and family to talk with everyone you know about why it will be important to vote yes on October 14. And those individual conversations are how we win this referendum. And I can't urge you enough to be part of that. And I know many of you already are. With that, let's dive into today's discussions. Can I begin my remarks by saying thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for your help in helping create Australia's new development policy. We could not have achieved what we have without you, our valued stakeholders. You are our most indispensable partners, on-the-ground enablers, our most impassioned allies, and as well, quite rightly, when the occasion calls for it, our most frank and fearless critics. This new policy is a product of those open and constructive discussions we've held with you in our first year of government. We ran a consultation process that received over 200 written submissions, surveyed 100 domestic and regional experts, held over 20 roundtables across Australia in which hundreds of people participated, and consulted extensively with countries in our region. We heard you, and I hope you see how the new policy reflects your perspectives and concerns. So I say again, thank you for your contribution. Australia's new development policy has clear commitments on the issues that you told us were important. Issues like climate change, locally led development, transparency and development capability. We are on a journey to rebuild our development program into one which works better to improve the lives of people in our developing country partners, advance our mutual interests in a peaceful and prosperous region, and embody Australia's values and reflect who we are. Those are the three underlying principles that drive our entire policy work. And the new policy will underpin the government's record international development investments, $1.7 billion in new spending over 5 years, and a commitment to long-term growth. We are committed to delivering a high-quality development program that makes a real difference. We want this policy to stand the test of time. The new commitments announced in the policy matter. They are about changing how Australia delivers development, including a refreshed approach to country and regional planning, backing locally led development, including through a new civil society partnerships fund, a renewed focus on climate change and gender equality, implementing the recommendations of the Development Finance Review, enhanced transparency and accountability, and stronger monitoring, evaluation and learning. Now, I've told the DFAT team that the real test of this policy will be how it's translated into practice, how we turn these commitments into tangible outcomes. And I had a great morning tea with the DFAT team last week that drove the policy, and while I thanked them for their hard work, I said the harder work begins now, which is implementation. And that's why I want to talk today about how we approach implementation. When I say we here, I mean we, to include everybody in this room and those attending online. Because in my view, successful implementation of transformative policy calls for a whole-of-country approach. Government needs our partners across academia, not-for-profit and the private sector if we are to make a difference. As I said in my remarks at the launch last month, I like to describe our approach to development assistance in 5 ways. It is based on the priorities of our partners. It is not transactional. It is transparent. We use every opportunity to drive local employment, procurement and skills development, and we make a high quality offering. All of this is central to the implementation of this new policy. And during DFAT's many consultations, many of you told us that the how was equally, if not more important than the what. We heard you. A key difference between this policy and what has come before us is its focus on changing how we will deliver development assistance. Australia will offer genuine partnerships based on respect, listening, and learning from each other. Pursuing locally led development is a powerful means to strengthen both our impact and our partners' capability. Development partnership plans will be a core element in translating this new policy into action. My expectation is that the DPPs will involve deep and broad engagement with partners and across government. Consultations should focus on how we work together as partners as much as what we will work together on. DPPs will reflect the strengths we have to offer and the things that set us apart. We recognise that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to development in our region. DPPs will reflect careful choices informed by consultation about how to focus our efforts to make a greater impact. And ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to Australia's development program, we are right to be ambitious. Today's forum is a unique opportunity to consider how we take advantage of Australia's new policy to match our ambition with action. Because government doesn't have all the answers, nor should we ever pretend that we do. I want to pose 3 challenges for this forum to consider. Challenge 1, how can we work together to approach local partnerships differently? What new bridges do we need to build to achieve genuine partnerships, recognising while our local partners may have different values, knowledge and expertise, effective partnerships and two-way learning are central to success. I'm particularly keen in your views on partnering approaches that have worked to build the capabilities of local actors and reduce transaction costs while managing the risks. Challenge 2, how do we make difficult choices about where to prioritise our efforts for the greatest impact? Is there a way we can better integrate the many strands to development effectiveness without overwhelming local partners? Challenge 3, how will we know where there is most potential to improve in what we do? For example, can we collectively be more frank and inclusive in the way we learn and share our learning? And how can we create a culture in the sector that rewards transparency, that is more willing to learn from failure and share lessons about what can be done better? Mistakes will be made. The critical thing is that we learn from those mistakes and improve our policy. So let me finish by reiterating that as we move forward in implementing Australia's new development policy, we will need you more than ever. I look forward to working together, to listening to your ideas, and I can't wait to see what comes out of today's forum. These forums are critical. I'll be quite frank with you. When I was a Shadow Minister, attending these forums was a great way of stealing ideas. So I look forward to many more ideas that I can adopt or steal or imitate, because only by working together can we improve our development policy, how we deliver on those 3 core principles I talked about earlier. Improving the lives of our neighbours and our friends, lifting them out of poverty, acting on their priorities and providing practical manifestations of who we are and the values that Australia holds dear. So thank you, Professor Stephen Howes and the ANU Development Policy for hosting us. Thank you to ACFID and IDCC for your collaboration in today's events, to its critical partners, and thank you for DFAT for your continued support of this forum and your continued passion on development to advance Australia's place in the world. Thank you very much for having me.
I'm hoping that, oh, it is on. Excellent. Minister, thank you so much, not just for coming and sharing your vision, but actually being open to some question and answers from our live audience. Unfortunately, we can't take questions from those online, so those of you who showed up today get to ask the difficult questions. I was saying to the Minister before we started that my job should be relatively easy, except that I've got to make sure he actually answers the questions. He said, good luck with that, so there's the challenge. I'm going to channel my inner Laura Tingle. So what we're going to do is just get the audience to ask. I'll take 3 questions to start with, and then we'll put those questions to the Minister. Minister, how long do I have you for?
You've got me to 9:10.
Okay, all right. So we've got 20 minutes. What I would like people to do is, first of all, just state your name and where you're from. I know a lot of the people in the room, but the Minister doesn't necessarily know you. So, but before we start with the open questions, I'm taking advantage of being the facilitator, so I'm going to ask you a question. This was a highly anticipated strategy. People have been waiting for it for a long time, and I think people waiting for a new incoming Labor government to deliver a new strategy for development. So it was highly anticipated. And the reaction to it has been generally positive. A lot of people have seen parts of the strategy that have really speak to their passions on international development. I guess, and you today outlined some of your key priorities for what you want to achieve with the strategy. One of the risks of having a strategy that everyone likes is that it says something to everyone and doesn't necessarily help make the hard choices that you just spoke about as one of the challenges. How do we decide which opportunities to pursue? So my first question is, when you think of the next few years of international development compared to maybe the last 5, what are you not going to be doing compared to what you would like to do more of? What would you like to walk away from? So maybe if I put that to you first, and then we can take 3 questions from the floor.
Well, thank you for that. I'd say my answer to that is twofold in terms of what I'd like to see less of or what we won't do. I'd like to see less transactional development projects, and that's no criticism of previous policies, but we really are serious about having long-term partnerships with our development partners. So I'd like to see that, and I'd like to see less projects that don't emphasise localisation, that don't emphasise local procurement, that don't emphasise skills transfer. We've seen projects that have been great in conception, but follow-through has not been great. For example, there hasn't been adequate resources allocated to maintaining infrastructure or transferring skills to train locals on how to maintain infrastructure. So that's a concrete example of what I'd like to see less of.
Can you maybe just outline a little bit what you think of when you're talking about transactional projects?
Well, I think one of the challenges and one of the things that we're investing in DFAT considerably, so one of the budget announcements was $36 million to build development capability within DFAT. It's very strong already, but I think one of the hangovers from the AusAid integration into DFAT was it obviously empowered heads of mission a lot more in developing development, and that has its positives. They're the sort of lead person in each country, so obviously they have a focus on that. But I think in the first few years of the integration, some of the development budget became a bit more transactional in terms of helping HOMs solve problems they had in the short term. And there's always going to be an element of that in development policy. I'm not naive about that. But I really am serious about stressing how important development capability is within DFAT. That's supported by Senator Wong. I made a bit of stir earlier this year when asked about whether AusAid should be separated from DFAT, and I said, no, I want development to take over DFAT. And that's sort of that's expressed in our development policy of centring development policy at the heart of statecraft, because it's got to be linked to everything else. But I want long-term relationships with our development partners. I want the development part of DFAT to be driving excellence in everything it does. And I know that's a cliche, but working with the missions, having a senior responsible officer in each country to not just look at the outcomes from each development project, but to look at it thematically. So look across all the projects that help with climate change, or look over a length of time, is all about longer term planning and partnering with countries that we partner with.
Great. All right, thank you very much. You did answer that question. So what we'll do now is take 3 questions. So please put up your hand, and I've got so we'll take 1, and then Bridie, and then there's 1 at the back. So 1, 2, and then 3. So here first.
Small enough room before I get the microphone. Hi, thanks for your attention, Minister. My name is Matt Spanningle. I work for Palladium International. I wanted to pick up one of the first to say it's such a relief to see a development policy that's a change from the 10 years of climate obfuscation. So congratulations to you and the team on that work. One of your challenges was around how do we measure this and how do we have transparency and how do we learn from our mistakes. So I previously worked with DFID in the UK, and they have a system where they kind of bring in a group of implementing partners and have a Chatham House exchange with no acknowledgement of who's saying what, but to have that informal and informed discussion. And I think there's a hunger within DFAT to learn from us, and we certainly in the development community would love to have more frank exchanges with DFAT. So as a suggestion, perhaps we can have that kind of a system or explore something like that so we can have an exchange of ideas without the fear of what it would mean for contracts and that kind of thing. Thanks very much.
Great. Okay. No, we'll bank that.
Do I agree?
Bridie, over here.
I'll answer it when I answer the 3 questions.
We're going to do all 3 first.
Hello, Minister. I'm Bridie from the Development Intelligence Lab. Congratulations on the policy and, more importantly, I think being here as well and taking these tough questions. Good job, Jackie, kicking us off in a good vein there. Minister, hearing you speak here today, hearing you speak at the launch, at every other stakeholder briefing that you are speaking on, you are speaking the language of what the experts in this room have been saying to government for the past decade, be it localisation, climate, the way we work being more important. But Minister, you're speaking to a safe crowd here. And when you walk out of this development space that lives and breathes the passion and the capability that you are talking about, you walk out of here into a cabinet room, into a party room, into a public that perhaps has headwinds that are stronger than those inside this room. And so too do the leaders from your department. So Minister, as these headwinds push and buffet the difficult choices that have to be made through the DPP process, I wonder, are you going to give coverage to your DFAT leaders to make those choices, to shoot for development impact and effectiveness and great partnerships, and perhaps to deprioritise the other headwinds that buffet the program, be it the geopolitics, the short-term transactionalism that you've seen in the past? How are you going to give coverage for your government to lead and implement this policy for development outcomes?
Okay, we'll hold that. That's a really great question. We'll hold that, and we've got one more up here.
Hello, my name's Sonia Palmieri. I'm the new head of the Department of Pacific Affairs here at the ANU. And so I want to thank Stephen for saying there is such a thing as academic freedom, and we do need to be very mindful of that. Minister, I'm very heartened by your point around frank and fearless advice and around learning from failure. I wonder if you've thought about ways in which this community can be more receptive and be more robust to take on the kinds of criticism that says, yes, we have failed. How can we say that in great honesty and transparency to the department that often feeds us, that funds us, that you actually lead?
Well, I might tackle the first and third question together because I think they are along the same theme. I think that, and I think that's a really interesting suggestion, and I'd certainly be very happy to look at what DFID has done in the past there. I'm serious about having more transparency of our program, and so more real-time reporting, more real-time analysis of the impact, and learning from it. So we're trialling, we've committed to implementing some very different ways of evaluating our aid program and feeding it in as quickly as possible into the programs while they're still running. I'm talking to Dr. Andrew Lee about his particular hobby horses around randomised control trials can play a role in development. And so we are really serious about it. I know there's a big debate about whether we should bring back the Office of Development Effectiveness. We've decided to go on a more flexible, real-time monitoring approach and to add more transparency. But we do need to create a safe space where you can provide feedback to improve the program. You're both absolutely right that I see it in both of my portfolios. If you think you're worried about losing a contract, imagine a defence contractor criticising defence. This is an area where we have to do better, so we have to create safe spaces, and Rod and I are really committed to doing that. Obviously, I would prefer it not to be on the front page of the newspaper, because then we can have a more nuanced response, but we do need to create safe spaces to do it, because that actually goes into your point, Bridie, which is how do I protect against the headwinds? I do that by two ways. One is by demonstrating the impact and being able to assure people that the impact of taxpayers' dollars is being spent effectively. Like, we are lifting people out of poverty. We are improving governance. We're helping fight climate change. We're helping build gender equality. So demonstrating not just to my colleagues in the government but the Australian people that the development assistance is being spent effectively is the first way we protect against the headwinds. And that's why the safe space is important. Secondly, putting our development policy at the heart of statecraft is one of the new things here in this policy. I'm the first, I'm happy to be corrected, but I think I'm the first international development minister to be a full member of the National Security Committee of Cabinet. We are putting development policy at the heart of what we do in statecraft because it is essential to how we engage with the world. It's not a nice to have over here that we'll look at when we've got some spare time and money. It is as critical to what we do as our sort of more orthodox diplomatic policy, as defence policy, as international policing cooperation. That's how we protect against headwinds and convince people that it's really worth doing.
All right, thank you, Minister. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. If people... Yes, Joe, sorry. I knew you were looking for... I didn't know where you were in the room. You need to be taller like me.
Sorry, I'll stand up. Thanks, Minister. I had a question about ministerial visits, and I swear my DFAT colleagues have not put me up to this. I guess ministerial visits are a really important part of diplomacy and of building relationships in our region. They are also highly choreographed affairs. They often lead to transactional approaches with lots of announcements. You don't necessarily hear frank and fearless feedback from the people you speak to because they're highly choreographed affairs. So I guess my question is, in this new era of working differently and thinking about the how and thinking about genuine partnerships and moving beyond transactional approaches, what's your experience of visits so far, and what is your thinking about how to do them differently so that you are building genuine partnerships and receiving frank and fearless feedback about how things are going on the ground?
All right, we can take one more question. So if you just hold, Minister. Oh, yep, over here. Sorry, next to Joe.
Thank you. Minister Darren Grimsey from EY. Minister, the Prime Minister launched the Southeast Asia strategy last week in Jakarta, and Nicholas Moore, the Special Envoy, his report is a bit of a chew, but there are 75 recommendations, I think, something like that in there. I was wondering whether you, well, I think 4 of them have been announced by the Prime Minister with some funding supporting them. I wonder whether you could elaborate on how you're going to work your way through the other 70-odd recommendations that are in that report. Thank you.
Right, we might just go to those two.
Sure. Yeah. On the latter question, we're working through them in a substantive way. Some of them involve funding commitments that we're working through now. So I think we decided to announce a few, as you do, to highlight the importance of the report and then work on the rest of them. one of the areas where there's crossover with what I'm doing in the development portfolio is Australian Development Investments, the $250 million impact investment fund that we've announced. That's going to be hugely relevant to what we do in Southeast Asia as well as the Pacific. And that's one area where we're sort of lining up our development policy with Nicholas Moore's report. Joe, on your point about visits, your cynicism shocks me. No, just joking. I'll make this point, like, it's actually really important for ministers to meet with leaders of other countries when they visit region and hear about what their priorities are. Does that lead to transactional approaches? I'm not sure. Like, there's a fine line between listing and acting on the priorities of your partner countries and transactional approach. But it is actually really important to hear what other countries are really passionate about. So I met with the Tuvalu Prime Minister when I was there a few weeks ago, and to hear firsthand what they would like us to partner on to help that country survive rising sea levels is really critical. Or when I was in Palau talking to them about their renewable energy transition. So visits are important. What I do encourage, for example, is always make time to talk to the locally engaged staff. That's something that the DFAT team do encourage as well. But I do get a flicker of nervousness from the A-base staff when I start asking, when I go a bit rogue and I find a few of them and I go and ask their views. But that's how I learn, and I remember we did a great morning tea with the PNG locally engaged staff at the High Commission, and hearing about what they thought was most effective around policing and security cooperation or education is really powerful. So ministerial visits, there's an element of choreography, but I can assure you I use it to actually get on the ground information and do a bit of wandering myself to actually understand. And that is complemented by the more formal consultation mechanisms. But it's really important. And last week, not only did I thank the DFAT team, there was a great, there would have been 50 or 60 locally engaged staff on a training course, and I really encouraged them to be honest both with the rest of DFAT but with me about what we can do better.
Minister, maybe just a quick follow-up to Joe's point, and thank goodness I don't have to manage ministerial visits anymore, but one of the things in the aid policy that was spoke really powerfully to me was the commitment to listening to diverse voices. So you really want a strong partnership with the Pacific. Talking to ministers and to government is really critical, but there are other really important players in these countries that contribute enormously to development impact, and their voice is often harder to hear. I'm talking about civil society, women. So there's probably opportunity to push a bit harder in your visits to have more time and space to listen to those diverse voices and back up the commitment in the aid policy.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right to say that listening to local voices isn't just listening to the government of the day. That's really important to acknowledge. They are a critical stakeholder, but they're not the only stakeholder. But that's why one of the key centrepiece announcements of this was the Civil Society Partnerships Fund, which is to grow that civil society in countries we partner with, so that we have, that there's more civil space there, but secondly, we have voices we can listen to. And I always do try and make an effort. So, for example, when I was in PNG, I had dinner with a great PNG youth organisation called The Voice.
Yeah,
where there was just 20 local reps that are so powerful. I've met with some of their leaders when they've come out here, and we try and do that where we can as well. We recognise the really strong role churches play in the Pacific, for example. That's why we fund the Pacific Fellowship Church program. I think I mangled the name slightly, but that's really good, and I've spent time with them both in country and when they've had fora here, and they don't hold back about what they think are the priorities, and that's great, and I continue to encourage that.
Great. Okay. I think we're at time. I want to thank you so much for coming, for talking about your priorities, but also being available to answer questions from the audience. I think you've given us 3 core challenges. I think the commitment to trying to find safe spaces to learn from what's worked and what hasn't is a really good one and fits neatly under your 3rd challenge for us. But I think we'll take those challenges forward during the day and hopefully be able to feed you lots of new good ideas on implementation. But thank you very much, Minister.